what is Scriptcamp? This is a screenwriting community focused on helping you take your concept from idea to first polished draft. That means we have a lot of free classes and workshops and events with pro guests. And we also have paid VIP member classes, boot camps, and Writer's Lab on Saturdays. So this is one of these boot camps that we offer. We are offering TV, feature, and rewrite at the moment, and are going to be adding playwriting and other stuff soon. A little about me. My name is Connor. I've been writing full-length scripts for about 11 years. Moved to LA in 2015. Whoops. There we go. So got signed for the first time in 2017 after placing in the Launchpad feature contest top 10. Since then have placed in nickel quarterfinals, nickel semifinals, wrote an episode of Creepshow in 2019, and recently have had a thriller spec set up with a major production company in town. I've been running these kind of screenwriting boot camps and writers' labs and classes in places like summer camps for a few years, and recently online for the past year and a half or so with Scriptcamp. So this boot camp is intended to take you from idea to first draft using this very step-by-step and practical method of writing pilots that I employ myself. This is sort of how I do it. There's not just one way to do this or to do any element of writing or artistic stuff in general. All you can do is sort of teach the best way that you know how, and I'm going to show you how I kind of go about this. So we have 2-hour weekly classes. The Friday, Saturday, Sunday are when our boot camp classes are. So this one is just 6 weeks for the pilot, 8 weeks for the feature, and it's going to be 4 weeks for the rewrite, though we're looking at adjusting that time still. Let's look at the schedule. So week 1 is going to be all about concept and logline, and perhaps one day fixing this weird glitch where every time I advance a slide, it makes it freak out and lose its mind. So week 1 is all about concept and logline, which we'll be refining today, making sure that just the basic elements of your TV show idea are in place. And we're going to start with sketchbooks, which are just a sort of document that you put all your unsorted ideas into. Any idea that you have about lines of dialogue or characters or scenes or pictures or images or videos or anything that sort of inspires you or helps you build out like a little lookbook for the tone and whatever you intend to be the most important stuff in that project. Next week we'll do structure and broad strokes starting on February 6th, in which we will write out a sort of summary of everything that happens in the script. Obviously it's still in its very clay-like working phase at the beginning where you're still figuring out where a lot of the major stuff goes, but we're going to try to hit down the major events of the story. We don't have to have absolutely everything filled in until the week after, where we'll start with scene cards, which are going to be a full paragraph for every scene in the story, and also allocating a certain number of pages that it's going to take. So you want to have an estimate of how far into the story you're going to be at the midpoint, at the whatever, at the act breaks. You want to kind of know the page that you want those things to fall on. It's okay if you don't hit those things exactly, but it's very helpful for me at least to have that general guide and roadmap of, am I too far ahead or too far behind my outline, and it just allows you to stay on track a little easier. So after that we go into first act. February 20th will be the first day, or the day where we talk about what to do in first act, and the week afterwards will be when you are writing your first either 10 pages for a 30-minute pilot or 20 pages for an hour-long one. Each week we meet to talk about what to do and some general tips and guidelines for that specific section in the script. And in the week following, that's when you are going to be writing those pages. So you can pick half an hour or an hour, but writing an hour-long episode obviously means that you will have twice as much work to do in the same short amount of time, which is fine if you're up for the challenge. You have to just go with the idea that excites you the most and the format that it fits most naturally in. But our last act is going to be March 6th, and you'll complete the pilot by the 13th. So if you're starting the pilot today, you will have, or if you're starting the course today, that means that you will have the finished pilot script by the 13th. So a pilot finished in just 6 weeks. Obviously, we always have to look at these questions of, will this be good? Is this going to be the shining beacon of all of your artistic efforts that will get you a career? The answer is probably not. Almost no individual script can be counted on to get you any one tangible result, and we have to sort of move beyond the idea that any individual script actually has to be good in order to help you or improve your skills or improve anything. Like, you're just trying to build skills throughout this and make sure that you are getting better. This is going to the gym. This isn't digging for gold. We have to always, as screenwriters, untether ourselves from our ideas to some extent, and we can't be too precious with them, because in very good case scenarios, they will be bought and changed by other people, and it's just a very collaborative medium. screenwriting is much more so than prose or poetry or playwriting or anything like this. There's going to be a lot of other sort of cooks in the kitchen, and a big part of being a reliable screenwriter is not only your ability to write a really competent, strong story within the format that you're given, but it's also to manage working with so many other people on changing this story. So you really just can't rely on any single project or idea as the thing that's going to make or break you. I think this next slide just kind of goes over what we just talked about. In the best case scenario, your idea will be bought and made into a show, and in the absolute best case scenario, you get to run the show or co-run the show with a more experienced runner who's brought in to help you. This is extremely unlikely unless you've been working in TV writers' rooms for many years, but maybe if you have a breakout success in features or playwriting or stand-up or something like that, it has been possible for people to get the ability to run their own show. It's easier if you are sort of the lead or you are the show in a way, but it has happened before. But much more likely is the best case scenario is that any individual pilot will be more like a writing sample that you're going to use to help get a manager or agent at some point that is going to help you get staffing meetings. And then if you get enough of those and you nail them, then you will be able to get on staff. As a staff writer, you will then have to work your way up through the hierarchy of writing producers on the show until eventually, with some mentoring and help and luck, you might be considered to be able to run your own show. But ultimately, a lot of TV writing is being on staffs and contributing ideas and working with ideas at the very sort of early stages. It's not all based on just writing fantastic TV episodes standalone and turning them in. It's like being in rooms with people and working well with them for 12 hours a day. If you're able to do that, that is a huge step. So showrunners and producers, though, when they look for the pilots, when they look through pilots, they are looking for your ability to just craft original characters and storyline and to weave all the elements of a pilot together, and ultimately to create a product that is entertaining and stands out, and it sort of does everything that it needs to do in a story sense. It's really your job to become a generator of unlimited ideas and to develop the skills necessary to execute them consistently on a quick time frame and with a very high level of quality. So just remember, this script is not intended to give you a great script, or any one course here is not intended to give you a specific tangible result at all in terms of screenwriting. This is not going to get you any money. This is not a guru course, and this is not going to be guaranteed to get you reps, meetings, any kind of result. This is all just to build your skills and to get better at writing pilots. So, this is not the best place to go to learn to be a director. In TV, often directors are not the writers of the show. They're sort of more like hired guns that are brought on for just an episode or two. Does somebody have a comment? Oh, I think someone's mic is just unmuted, picking up some background sound. But so remember, if you want to be a director, probably not the best place to go into TV, or this is not the route to go into TV. If you want to star in a show, this is a little more feasible if you plan to sort of be like a, Tina Fey sort of show creator and star kind of thing. If you can always sort of attach yourself to your idea and be like, I am this show. If you're buying the show, you're buying me as the lead. So you can set that up, and if you are a fantastic performer or have some great sense of, charisma, acting, singing, whatever it is that you do, if you are fantastic at it, it's possible to attach yourself as the lead. If this is a sort of dream show that you've been working on for many years, or an idea you've had for your whole life, or it's your life story, or it's a really important true story, this may not be the best project for this course. You do need to still, remember, detach yourself from these ideas, and remember, this is work. No one starts out good at this, and you'll have to just get all the bad scripts out of the way before you can one day get to the good ones. Okay, so why do we write a pilot? It's to practice getting good at writing pilots in 95% of the case. We want to work up to the point where you can start either winning contests and fellowships and get representation through there, or possibly you could get a job as a writer's assistant and then work your way up through that system, but then you'll have to have a really good pilot to show for it. Just remember that, when you're a bricklayer making a road, you don't have to worry too much if any individual brick is good or not. It's like irrelevant, and you have a road to build. Okay, so let's look at the overview for today's class. Sorry about the slideshow being all funky. Let me switch to just this. So, what do we have today? Ground rules, TV writing basics. A little about my process, which is going to always be the same, whether it's TV, a play, anything. I sort of go through the same basic 5 steps. We'll look at sketchbooks and what you're going to kind of be including in a sketchbook. The answer is there's really nothing wrong to include, but some examples of good things to include, I guess. Why is this picture kind of creepy to me? There's something a little unsettling about this image. It reminds me of like The Ring or something. All right, so we'll look at. We might have some sketchbook exercises with some examples of stuff for you to put in there. We'll work. You can open and start your sketchbooks, and also during this class, you can already be just like while I'm talking and while we're going over these slides, you can be adding whatever elements that you have ready into the sketchbook, or maybe if you're juggling between several different ideas, then this would be a good class for you to just put down all of what you have, and to you can share it in the chat, and we can take a look and give you suggestions for which one to go with. We'll look at time slot, format, and genre, which are just things that you have to know and understand how they work. And in order to really get a hold of these things, you just have to watch a lot of American TV, because American TV works differently than other countries' media, and there are certain formats here that don't exist there, certain formats in other countries that don't really exist here. So we're going to be talking exclusively about the kind of American model in this class, which you just have to get to know if you want to write TV in America. Premise and status quo shows are two just sort of narrative storytelling styles in TV, in which one is sort of the type of story that is every chapter is progressing a larger overarching story where you need to have seen everything that comes before it and has consistent continuity and these larger scale conflicts and mysteries that need to be resolved over many episodes. A show like, Lost or Game of Thrones. And then we have these sort of status quo shows where everything kind of resets in continuity at the end of every one. They're more sort of either procedurals with a case of the week or, monster of the week, things like that. Or they could be a lot of cartoons are like this. Sitcoms too. So loglines, we'll have series logline and pilot logline. You need to ultimately have both. If you only have part of one or the other today, you can share it in class, and we can help you refine one or the other of them. Loglines are the simplest written expression of a premise, so this is one sentence that sort of sums up what the entire series is about or what the pilot itself is about. Okay, so let's go over ground rules, then we will take questions. So a couple things to know just before you pick your idea for the course. Don't do true stories, anthologies, soap operas, rewrites, or adaptations. We have other classes for rewrites. We haven't done any adaptation classes yet, but we might at some point. True stories or anthologies are just going to be like true stories and anything that requires you to do a vast amount of research, including historical. So probably don't do a historical either unless you are really familiar with the time period and culture that it takes place in. But ultimately, anything that requires you to do a vast amount of research or get a lot of things right or have any real fealty to reality or to one version of events is going to be tricky to pull off in just 6 weeks of writing a brand new pilot from the very beginning, especially if you're brand new at this. And time travel is one of those things that will just confuse you and everyone, and I've never seen a student complete a time travel script in this course. That's not a challenge, that's to say it is difficult to do, so you will regret it. So just get used to the idea of sharing your work with me, with other students, and with everyone, even at these very early stages, because TV is like this. TV is where you're working with these sort of, blumps of clay. What's a blump? These lumps of clay that are these proto versions of ideas, or these unformed visions of where these shows or episodes or even moments or jokes or things will be going, and your job is to throw those back and forth with a room full of other people and, make them better. Which means that you have to share ideas even if they're in the bad version of them. So it can be tough to hear big notes at early stages, but just get used to this idea working in TV. You got to use your real name in this class or anything that at least resembles a name. Just don't be using screen names at Scriptcamp. If you're going to be in the boot camps, just pick a first name or a nickname, middle name, anything to use. You can't go by screen names in the industry. Okay, so any questions so far on the ground rules? Let's open our chat. Oh, did I set up the new chat? I will in just 1 second. I can bring it up like this, and then I have to do something really quick. There we go. All right, there's the bootcamp chat. Awesome. So let's see if we have any questions so far. Yes, this is the correct chat. Tom says he's been making a small start. That's great. So we'll have time to look at that later. Any questions based on the ground rules that we've gone over? No questions. Okay, let's keep going. Oh, unless Tom has one. Okay, great. Let's continue then. So, in the US, TV shows are usually written by staffs, meaning groups of writers that consist of, staff writers, which are kind of the low-level junior writers, and then they're overseen by a hierarchy of writing producers that all have their own sort of ranks within that room, and every room works differently, and you really just have to... They say it's helpful to be a writer's assistant first, just to get the feeling of how a room functions and operates, and these are all overseen by the showrunner, who is the heart and brain of the show. They're the head of writing and production, and the most important person there. The number of staff writers can vary anywhere from 1 on certain limited series and stuff. Usually in the US, 1 is the exception rather than the rule, but there are still a couple shows written by one person, like, True Detective or things like that. And then 2 to 3 writers on limited series or more focused and singular voice shows like, Fargo or The Terror will have really small rooms. And then all the way up to, 15 plus writers for big comedies, sketch and late night. Usually comedy rooms will have more writers than drama rooms. So how do we get staffed? One track, like I mentioned, is by starting as a by starting as an office PA. Then you can have the chance after a couple of years of that to network and move up to writer's PA, which you, in the past, have historically needed to be in LA to do all this. The pandemic has perhaps changed some of that in the short term. I get the feeling in the long term we will be drifting ultimately back to in-person stuff. But it takes a couple of years to work through the assistant track. I won't be able to help too much with this because I myself did not go through this. The other track here is obviously just get really good at writing pilots, as well as other stuff that sort of showcases your writing skills, stand-up, web shows, features, books, anything that just showcases your voice and gets your work out there, can build attention and, round out your portfolio and stand out. There's just no point in eventually getting the meetings that you can get from these things, though, if you're not already a great TV writer. So you need to work on building those skills first before you start to go out and worry about trying to get reps. So you'll eventually get a manager through contests or fellowships. Other accolades or sometimes a placement in a film festival or something can get you meetings, as well as just networking, which is one of the most important things to do. Your manager will submit your portfolio during staffing season, then it's on you to really nail those staffing meetings, so you can tell there's like 100 hurdles to jump through before you even get the lowest ranking sort of staff job. But you're also going to be in the same room as people for 12 hours a day, potentially more sometimes, for several months, so you need to be good in a room, which is a term that they use to mean you have good social skills, you're extroverted and good at receiving and giving feedback gracefully and kindly, and you're just nice and not a jerk. You're good at quickly assessing the problems in an idea and incisively cutting to the heart of solutions to those problems rather than just pointing out problems, because unless you're someone who comes with solutions, if you're just coming with problems every day, people will get sick of that pretty quick. You got to riff off other people and collaborate well and be able to, improve jokes and not just jokes, but any story material that's being thrown around. You need to be able to put your own spin on it, contribute to it without being overbearing. You need to know when to talk and when to be quiet. This is just an extremely social job, and screenwriting in general is very, very social. So being nice and presentable and kind, it will be just a huge leg up for you. You need a thick skin as well, as there's almost like this is 95% rejection and failure, and even, as they say, even success feels like failure sometimes. So get used to that. Also, plan to move to Los Angeles if you want to be writing TV in the U.S. I know that currently there are some remote rooms still working entirely over Zoom and stuff. That doesn't mean that it will be easier for you if you aren't in LA. And as trends change, and as things happen with the pandemic, eventually rooms, I feel, will start to go back into primarily in person. Any questions so far? Here's a question. Is New York going to be also a place for writing, or is it really LA only? As far as I know, it's pretty much LA only. There might be a couple rooms in New York. I don't know how they really work, and my guess would be that you still might be able to get those jobs in LA, and it would be harder to get them just in New York. I'm not 100% sure if that's true, and we should get somebody on, I think, probably, who knows New York better than me. But from my understanding, New York is more for stand-up and playwriting, and sketch and improv, and those things are all really big there. As for getting on a staff and writing network TV, not as much nowadays. I think there are a couple of rooms there. There's maybe a couple in Georgia, but for the vast majority are going to be based out of LA. Okay, so let's keep going if we have no more questions. News stuff is also really big here, says Jason. News as in New York or in LA? That's possible. I don't know anything about how news works in New York. Okay, yeah, so that's probably true. If you want to work in the news, then New York might be the place to go. We'll need a separate camp for that, though. I don't know. I couldn't tell you the first thing about news or media. Okay, let's continue. So what does spec mean? Spec means several different things, which is slightly contradictory and confusing. In features... Oh my gosh. Google Slides, why are you doing this to me? So, in features, spec refers to a movie that you've written on your own with no commission, you've written it for the purpose of getting your work out there as a writing sample to try to get meetings or reads, or perhaps trying to get it made on your own, submitting to production companies, things like that. So most features you write will be specs unless you're writing, a commission or you've been hired to do it. In TV, a spec episode is more like a sort of fan fiction episode of an existing show that's currently on the air and has been critically well liked and is usually in its kind of second to fourth season, or has been super long running, like something, like CSI or The Sopranos, or not the Sopranos, what am I saying? The Simpsons, something like that. But these are rarely needed nowadays and are mostly only for certain fellowships or contests that accept these. Most showrunners don't like to read these anymore. And you're better, they're fun to do and they're good practice, but you don't need to have these in your portfolio. A spec pilot is usually just called a pilot, and this is referring to an original first episode of a theoretical series that does not exist and probably won't ever exist. So just remember, we're probably not going to get more episodes or a show out of this. These are practice, and these are writing samples, and these are things to, lift those dumbbells and build your muscles and improve your skills. You're going to use that as a writing sample to potentially get reads in meetings and to enter contests. So, oh goodness. Let's look at this quick quote on structure here before we move on. This is just a little nice Vince Gilligan quote on story structure about how it's it's the scaffolding that is the real work of writing. So this is what you have to do before, in all the pre-writing. We spend several weeks on pre-writing in Scriptcamp just to make sure that we get the outline really, really, really carefully nailed down, because that's something that's not only helpful for your own process, but when you're working with collaborators like producers or a manager who's developing a script with you, you need to be able to lay out a story without writing the entire thing. You need to be able to write a truncated and synopsized and clean and efficient version of that, and anywhere from one page in what's called a one sheet all the way up to a treatment, which is up to 20, 30, sometimes even 40 pages of writing out the entire story to help someone else visualize it and make changes to it and give you notes and things before you actually commit to doing those pages. So very important to keep structure in mind and to keep very organized as you're writing, so that by the time that you are working with other people, which if you want to write TV and movies, you will be working with other people, unless you plan to write and direct everything yourself, you need to keep them all on the same page for what you guys are doing. So what's an outline? That's a blueprint for structuring the story of your pilot, and you can have an outline for the whole series as well, but considering the fact there's not really a point in writing a whole series and writing any episode beyond the pilot, we are mostly going to be talking about outlining just the pilot stories themselves. So this is going to provide this overview of the story beats and scenes before you start writing this whole script in screenplay format. There's many different ways of doing this, and there's not a right or wrong way to outline or pre-write or any of these things, but we're going to just focus on my very practical approach, which has very clearly delineated steps 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to go through. This is the process that I use myself, and also one that I think will be helpful for you guys to learn if you don't already have a structure or a process of your own. If you don't have one of your own, you got to just start trying them until you find one that works. So we start with the logline. That's always going to be one sentence that explains the story in terms of who's the protagonist, what are they struggling against, what do they want, what in the world needs to change, what's the antagonist, what is the time frame. All these kind of things kind of blend together into making an excellent logline. We have the sketchbook, which is going to be this document, again, that you're not turning into anyone, though we do look through them in the class. It's going to be just a blank, it's like an empty journal full of all of the, it's a collage of all of the inspirations for this idea, any assorted things that have to be in it, or places that the characters have to go in it, or ideas for how, the world's going to work, or the rules of that world, or the lines of dialogue, or characters, or anything really. So that sketchbook is going to be just to get ideas down and have some singular centralized place, so you're not, pulling them off of sticky notes from the back of your fridge from 1997 or whatever. Our story beat summary is going to be a broader outline that's going to have all the major structural beats marked out and written down, so you know exactly where your act breaks are going to be, you know where your midpoint's going to be, you know where the sort of climax is going to be, you know what. So this is just setting those central tent poles in place that you know you're going to have to get to. And then following week, we go into scene cards, which are a really detailed outline for your entire story that sort of begins to verge on being closer to a treatment depending on exactly how much you put into this. But at this point, you're already sort of writing the script and making those decisions and like doing that heavy lifting of making story choices. So this actually feels a lot like writing. And it's where you'll be solving a lot of the problems of the story, and you may need to do several passes at this to make sure that everything is kind of adding up and clicking together. At that point, finally, we go to pages, which is a term that they do use in the industry. This is not just exclusive to me. Going to pages means you stop pre-writing and actually go into writing the thing in proper format, actually committing to screenplay pages, as opposed to just outlining or, one-sheets, treatments, that sort of thing. Any questions so far about this, or about anything we've talked about? Tom says, I've read Save the Cat that has a similar structure, but what I've seen TV Pilot is a bit different from features. Yeah, so the general story structure that I use is pretty similar to something like Save the Cat, which is pretty similar to a lot of other structures that exist that are all kind of just like the same sort of story shape that have been broken down in different ways. Mine has a few different terms and a few different spots where I put things, and like what you'll do as well is while you're learning how to write, you will be taking different structures and trying them out and just finding what works best for you, because there's not just one correct way to do this, but there are certain commonalities, and the 3 acts, there's an act break at the end of each act, there's a climax and a finale and a denouement, and all these things do kind of like show up consistently in all these styles, in many different books and many different methods. So in terms of how our feature is different from TV, the main difference is going to be that a pilot can have, and often does if it's a premise pilot, it has many threads left hanging at the end of it. You don't have to resolve everything. So, in fact, you should not resolve everything. If this is a premise pilot, you have to strategically leave a journey left to, like a theoretical implied journey for the characters to go on after this story is done. You have to leave us off on a place where we're like, oh, I'd be excited to see more of that story. But we have to understand that it has just been the first chapter of it. If you're doing a Status Quo show, the difference is that you are actually writing a beginning, middle, end, complete little tale, like a movie would be, but you have to leave everything at least somewhat in its place so that we can understand how things could get back to normal next week. Obviously, some cartoons play pretty fast and loose with this, and like it's not that big a deal if in Dexter's Lab he burns the city down in one episode, then the next episode the city's back. Like in certain cartoons, continuity doesn't really matter at all. So those are the 2 major narrative styles that make features differ from pilots, I would say. Okay, let's keep going. Any questions about the process though? Idea, logline, sketchbook, story beat summary, scene cards, go to pages. Any questions about that or what those things mean? No questions. Okay, let's continue. So, sketchbook. This is something you can start and make today. This is going to be that, like I mentioned, that place to collect all of your unsorted ideas as you develop your story. You can be working on this and adding stuff to this all throughout writing. This will include ideas for the characters. This will include snippets of dialogue, notes about the setting or locations or different places that matter in your story. The themes or the anti-themes, dramatic arguments, you can start already kind of sketching out and making note of here. You can brainstorm ideas for premise scenes and sequences that are sort of going to fill out the middle of your story. The second act, which is where the story really lives in screenwriting. Remember, the second act we usually say is the movie or is the show. It is the pilot. So you have to, before you go into it, make sure you have 3 to 5, rock solid scenes that take the premise that you are offering and making promises about, and you're fulfilling on those promises to their full potential in such a way that we, are still moving the story forward while playing the games that you've suggested to be possible in this world. And ideas for your ending. Ending is, of course, going to be super important to stick no matter what the story is, because this is what people leave the theater with or turn off the TV with, and the thing that makes them decide whether or not they're going to come back for next week. Can you guys think of any endings that you've seen that made you immediately have to tune into the next episode? What was a show that you binged that, what was it that hooked you about the ending? And you can feel free to either write in chat or on mute.
I mean, the classic first episode of Game of Thrones where Bran gets pushed out the window at the end.
Yeah, I think we may have mentioned this in a previous TV class. Why did you feel that you had to come back and see the next episode after that one?
I mean, it just ends with like, two very shocking moments kind of back to back that neither of them really have a resolution. You have the reveal that the twins are incestuous, and then you have the reveal that, and then you have the betrayal about pushing the child, and you don't know, does the child live, or what's going to happen with this brother or sister. We have this like king that's married to the incestuous. It's like just so many unanswered questions that all have really interesting threads.
Yeah, so leaving strategically unanswered questions in place will make us say, oh, you want to know the answers to those questions. And also, it's going to be something that, like, with that show, would you say it was sort of so shocking that you're like, if they would do that, what are they going to do next? Like, what else would they do if that's what's possible in this world?
Yeah, and like it also was like the things that I expected to be shocking and happening, because you have the opening with like the White Walker. It does a different type of shocking thing, which I think also is exciting. Like, wow, they can go in all sorts of directions.
Yeah, so the ending for a premise pilot is going to be all about like possibilities for the future, questions that you haven't answered that have like that it feels like we will get answers to those eventually. You don't want to have big questions set up that it feels like they're never going to actually get to that or come up with any logical way to land that. So you want to have something that you like. That's why it's important in a show with a lot of questions to answer some questions, just to show that you are aware that answering questions is satisfying and it's something that you plan to do and intend to do and can do in a cool way. So like, definitely don't leave only questions hanging at the end of a premise pilot. Willow says, you don't remember what hooked you, but Dark Crystal Age of Resistance. Yeah, that's that newer Dark Crystal show. And I don't remember the ending of the pilot either, but yeah, that had a lot of amazing sort of... I just wanted to keep watching to see what new weird goblins they had in the next episode, because there's like... That show should basically just be called Look at All These Goblins. Alright, anyone else have one that they saw? They want an ending to an episode that made you feel the need to tune in and binge the rest or come back right away?
There's this animated series called Kaiji, which is a Japanese anime, and I'm pretty sure some elements of Squid Game are based on that series, because it's like the guy who's so deep in depth, and he goes to these sort of like organized games in order to either get rich or you'll end up somewhere as a human slave. Like, we don't know exactly what happens with them, but each episode always ends on like a moment of despair or like that something huge is about to happen. So you keep being hooked, like, how is he going to get out of this?
Right, yeah, that's sort of classic pulp, sort of like cliffhanger storytelling where at the end of the episode, the main character is stuck in an impossible situation, and you're drawn back to watch the next one because you've seen them get out of several hair-raising situations, but you can't imagine how they could get out of this one. But you're like, there must be a way. He must somehow have some, tactic to escape from this. So you're interested to see how the main character will solve this next problem, right?
Yeah, that as well. And also, it's fascinating to see some of the psychological aspects of, well, like how do people really make strategies to screw each other over. It's like so fascinating to watch.
Awesome. Yeah, I have not heard of that show, but that sounds like a good way of keeping the audience hooked. It's a very sort of comic book storytelling style to always end on this huge cliffhanger or this situation where it's like, how will he get out of this one? Very, rooted in the dime book era, the film serial kind of endings. Those are great. Cool. Let's keep going. What do we have next? How to fill out the sketchbook. So, how to start. You can start doing this now, so you can already just go to Google Drive and make a sketchbook for the show that's called, the name of the show and sketchbook. And through the rest of this class, you're going to be adding unsorted ideas to this with no filter, no wrong answers, just lines of dialogue, characters, locations, scenes. Just put it all down on here. And there's a couple main things that we will be looking for. Remember, there's not really a proper format for this. There's no right or wrong format. You should ideally have a couple of your main premise scenes outlined on here. At the top, you should have your logline and your genre and format. And during the labs, we can go over and help you if you're not quite sure what to put in these at all. But let's look at the things that you absolutely should have in your sketchbook. So I mentioned logline. So title, if you've got it, if you have several different working titles, that's fine. We can help you choose, or you can just give us whatever you want, unfinished one that you have. So yeah, title, format. So format's going to be 60-minute or half hour. There are some exceptions to this, so if you really want to do some different format, you usually can, but these are the easiest ones to do. Premise or status quo, meaning is this going to be, a show that there are larger questions that we're trying to answer and larger conflicts that we're trying to resolve, and each episode is simply a chapter of that longer story, like a long movie, like something like Ozark, or is this going to be status quo and be something like Family Guy, where there's no real continuity and everything kind of just resets every episode? Genre. We can go over in a little bit what the different genre sort of choices are, but I think a lot of us have some idea of what the genre of our show is. Don't pick more than two. The second you start adding 3, 4, 5, it just gets confusing, so pick 2 to combine max. We'll have our series logline, which can be a little bit broader in scope and require a little less urgency, but this is going to be a sentence that describes often the world, the main character, or both, and the types of conflicts that they're getting into in this world. Our pilot logline is going to read like a movie logline, more or less, and remember, we want to have like a catalyst, usually a sense of urgency, and your main character's singular journey through this story, even if it is more of an ensemble and you have a lot of characters, usually try to frame it around one person's journey. If you can, it's just a little easier in the pilot logline. And not to mention, most shows do have a main character. There's very few shows that have every single person has directly equal kind of narrative weight. Even in big ensemble shows, who's the main character in Lost? It's Jack. So like you can almost always, I will say, there are rare shows that have true ensemble formatting in the U.S. at least. I think in Korean dramas these are more common. Okay, so we can look at this exercise and see if I feel like doing it. Come up with premise scenes for this animated half-hour show about noodles. I don't think we'll do this right now, but I at least want you to look at this because it's very funny, and this is just like an example of the kind of exercise that we'll be doing in the Scriptcamp classes. We can, like, a lot of the time we can build skills for screenwriting by taking someone else's premise and then coming up with ways to fill in, the key scenes in that thing, because that's what a lot of TV writing is, especially if you're on a staff. You're working with someone else's ideas and taking the framework that someone else builds and trying to, come up with interesting scenes and characters and locations and whole storylines within that person's voice that fit into that person's world that they have made for you. So this is the kind of thing that we'll be doing. Like, you can look at this 2021 Sundance Episodic Lab logline, the world's first noodle noir, where a hard-boiled rigatoni detective in the corrupt city of Los Angeles struggles to sort fact from fiction as he unravels a dangerous case that could land him in hot water. So we, in our loglines, typically try to not it's not important to have jokes in them or make us try to, we don't have to, like, for a comedy logline, it doesn't have to make you laugh or anything like that, and it's more important to be clear than it is, and about what the story is, than it is to be kind of coy or funny with the wording of it. So I wouldn't write your logline exactly like this, but that's not to say that this is bad or doesn't tell you kind of the kind of world that we're getting into and just like a hint of the absurdity that we'd see. So an example of an exercise we might do is come up with some premise scenes for this. So it's kind of the second act of the story. I'm assuming this is half hour. It is half hour. So what would be in the sort of middle of this? We might come up with some scenes where your rigatoni detective has to get into a bar fight at a bar populated only by forks and knives. So like you're always going to be just coming up with fun, just spitball off the top of your head scene ideas for other people's stories. It's like a nice exercise and way to just improve at TV writing. Yes, the puns, Tom, the puns. So let's continue through this. Unless anyone has any questions so far, feel free to continue typing if you do. But I'll flip the slide at least. So our next slide is, these are just going to be more examples of episodic lab premises for us to be coming up with premise scenes for. You can take a look at these on your own if you want, but this is like just the sorts of stuff we do on Scriptcamp to keep our skills sharp and to make sure that we are like lifting those right weights to become better writers. I'll check if we have questions, and we'll go into Timeslot and Formats. Jason says, the detective interrogates a saucy meatball escort who has personal relations with the criminal that we're hunting. A saucy escort. Wow, that's a spicy scene. Okay, let's go to format and time slots. Enough of this nonsense. This is serious. This screenwriting is very serious business. I hope you guys know. There's no jokes allowed. Okay, so time slot and format. The basic choices are going to be half hour or full hour. Oh, why are you doing this? Why are you flashing colors? Google Slides, you don't normally do this. So half an hour or hour, normally a page a minute is the kind of rule of thumb. So 30 to 34 pages for a half hour episode, and 60 to 65 pages for an hour long pilot. 30-minute shows are expected to be comedic or highly episodic, but there are exceptions nowadays, so that you're not actually limited by, in terms of genre, based on the format that you choose. So, we can look at the show Servant on Apple Plus, which is like a horror mystery show. Dead to Me on Netflix, a dramedy. The End of the Effing World, it's a dark comedy thriller. A Teacher on FX is a drama. So, there are all kinds of half-hour format shows now that are of many different genres. You might just sort of be pioneering in that space to some extent because it is just expected that they will be comedy or animated, usually comedy or action adventure. That's just what historically has been true. It will not always be the case. So 60-minute shows, 60 to 65 pages, are various genres, but drama, action adventure, western, procedurals are often an hour long. There's no real rules. You can have, if you have an hour long comedy, my thought would be that would be nowadays those tend to be dramedy or dark comedy or like mystery comedy, something like blended with comedy. But you, in theory, could just have an hour-long comedy. It's just I couldn't name one for you. Other formats do exist. We won't really be focusing on them for the purposes of this class, and most pilots that you'll be submitting to contests or fellowships or submitting to showrunners in theory to get staffing meetings or things like that will be half-hour or hour-long. So there's 15-minute sort of web shows or some animated kind of Adult Swim, Aqua Teen kind of stuff. And there's 70-minute shows that are, more like limited series or mini-series like Sherlock or Chernobyl or things like that. But and then there's always these variable length shows in the wild west of streaming, like The Mandalorian, that you can have one episode that's 33 minutes long and one episode that's 55 minutes long, or anything like that. But ultimately, just kind of, unless you have some brilliant take on why you should have something that's not these formats, just pick 30 minutes or 60 minutes. And then you will have to have a genre. Every show fits into some sort of genre. If it can't be categorized in a genre at all, then you might be writing something too weird to use as a writing sample, probably. Or maybe it's so brilliant that there's no way it can be categorized and you just need to kind of write it, and you shouldn't probably do it for this course, but on your own, you should just write it and prove how brilliant and genre-defying it is. For the most part, you kind of need to know what you're selling and know what you're marketing, and, stories as we understand them in different media arenas, like TV or like the movies or like plays or books or anything, they fall into certain categories in terms of content and promises, which we call genres, and these are to help us know which people are going to watch and enjoy what shows because they like seeing what kind of stuff. In the bookstore, this is to help us know where to shelve each book, and genres are a marketing invention to help booksellers decide where to put things and to help people find things that they like to read. So in terms of TV, these are pretty much the options. You have comedy, drama, and, any combination of dark comedy, dramedy. You can always mash these together. Crime, sci-fi, fantasy, action-adventure, mystery, thriller, and horror. There's a lot of overlap between mystery, thriller, and horror. A lot of overlap between action and adventure, which is why I sort of did a slash there. Sci-fi and fantasy, a fair amount of overlap too, but they do have their own distinctions between them. So these are the main kind of categories. Within these, we do have procedurals, so that's going to be often based around some kind of institution or job. So we have often legal, police, hospital, or some other profession in which our characters are going to be taking on some kind of thing of the week, case of the week, patient of the week. And in those shows, they're more status quo. They don't always have larger character arcs and things to follow over multiple seasons, but sometimes they do as well, like Grey's Anatomy, things like that. I'm not sure if it's a procedural or not. I think they do have sort of patient of the week type structure, but they also have larger character arcs over the course of many years. So animated shows are usually 30 minutes and either comedy or action adventure. This is not strictly necessary, but If you have some show that you have listed that you want it to be animated, it's not going to change how you write it, but it's going to change how people perceive it, and it's going to change the people that are actually able to make it, and it's going to raise a lot of eyebrows if it's in some genre that we're like, why is that animated? So if it's just like, if you're doing a mystery thriller, or a drama, or a dramedy, and it happens to be right that it's animated also, we might be like scratching our heads at why on earth you chose for this to be animated. Usually we like animation to highlight the strengths of certain genres. So comedy, drawing, drawings can be very funny very easily, and it's a lot of what we find funny is just people talking and interacting, which are never that hard to animate with just 2D characters. In terms of action adventure, visuals really, like, there's a reason action adventure is the main genre of comic books. It's because a visual medium really suits the action adventure genre, and we can get a lot of spectacle, a lot of interesting kind of flashier fighting and action sequences and effects and things like that we wouldn't be able to get in live action as easily. So that's the expectation for this. You should have a good reason for why your show needs to be animated, but ultimately it's not going to change that much because you're not going to get a show probably, and like you're writing a pilot to build your skills, so it doesn't really matter ultimately that much. Okay, but you can see a grid of different shows here. You can sort of identify what genres all of these are by just picking one or two of these above listed options. Remember, don't use more than two. You don't have to use more than two of these to describe any show on this list. Even shows that do feature a lot of different kind of stuff going on. We might look at something like Supernatural, and is that like action adventure? Is it mystery thriller? Is it horror? Is it fantasy? Does it have sci-fi elements sometimes? Yeah, kind of all of those things, but you could still probably boil it down to just two things. This is probably fantasy mystery thriller show, like ultimately, and even though it occasionally has elements of horror or of sci-fi or of you could say drama or crime type stuff at times as well, we can always just pick two genres that describe this most carefully. So I would say fantasy thriller, prefer Supernatural for the most part. Because it has this very monster of the week kind of format that mystery and thriller really works well with. Okay, so any questions about genre or about any of the stuff we've talked about recently? Let's see. Tom says, would I say a show like Doctor Who would be more status quo or premise? I haven't watched Doctor Who, to be honest. Since there is often a long-running story spanning over several episodes within a Monster of the Week type structure, which is similar to the show I want to make, which is why I asked the question. To me, from what I've seen, Doctor Who seems to be more status quo with the occasional, like more Monster of the Week, with, depending on the year and depending on who's running it and depending on what's going on, different lengths of, like, arc of other stuff in the background. Much like, the Star Trek shows are often like this too, where it's like there is a thing of the week, but there is sometimes some larger thing that they're building to over time. I ultimately call those kind of hybrid shows, but they do lean more in one direction or the other. Something like The Next Generation, for the most part, is a status quo show where you can kind of drop in anywhere. And although I understand that characters are changing over time, crew positions are changing, people are getting promoted, sometimes characters die occasionally. It's like usually the ones who die are the red shirts of the episode. We're not killing major characters that often, and it's not entirely predicated on really strong, consistent story elements. I think the new Star Trek show might be different than this. I haven't watched it, so I can't say for sure. But to me, Doctor Who seems primarily like Monster of the Week, which would make it a status quo show. But there's a lot of sort of middle ground, and it's a spectrum between those two things ultimately. Not just as status quo, but you have to watch certain important episodes to understand how the actor playing Doctor Who changes. Okay, yeah, so that's a whole. I don't know how that works at all. I'm not a hooligan. Whovian? Shouldn't it be hooligan? So another question. That was not a question. That was just Jason saying that it's probably status quo. Okay, hopefully that answers that question, Tom. Shouldn't it be hooligans? What does Whovian even mean? Come on.
I think it's Whovian. I believe it was Whovian.
Yeah, that's not a thing. All right. Well, hopefully that answers that. Any questions about genre, about the genre of the thing that you are working on? Maybe you're not clear what genre it is, or maybe you want to know what genre should I pick, or anything like that? All right, no questions. Sounds good. Let's keep on going. Our next slide is going to be on premise pilots. So the two major storytelling styles within TV are going to be premise shows in which we have like a larger overarching story that, oh my, why do you do this? We have this larger overarching story that every episode is just going to be a chapter of, something like, Breaking Bad or Ozark or Penny Dreadful. These are similar. The pilots themselves are kind of like the first act of a feature film in some ways, in that they're setting all the major important pieces into place. We're getting introduced to the characters as quickly as possible, learning about the world or the world that they are about to enter, and we watch as they are presented with the major kind of conflict of the show's premise, and we sort of tip over our first few dominoes in what we understand to be a long train of dominoes that's going to take many different episodes to fully get through. So, we need to meet your main character, and your ensemble if you have a slightly broader set of characters. We need to learn kind of what is wrong in their life, what are they yearning for, what needs to change, and then this is like a movie, something comes in and changes that. Shakes up their world, they enter some new world sometimes, just their life is altered by some event that can be a coincidence that sets them off on some longer journey, trying to unravel some larger mystery, or answer some larger questions, or just deal with conflicts that are going to take potentially years to overcome. But this is ultimately, the pilot itself should be looked at as a singular journey with a concrete beginning, middle, and end, with some threads strategically left hanging. Just like focus on telling a beginning, middle, end story really strongly, more than setting up stuff for threads that you won't ever be able to cinch off, considering you're not going to probably get more than one episode of this. And no one's going to read more than just a pilot. So you have to just write a pilot. And when you do that, focus more on this was a satisfying and interesting and amazing read on its own, not setting up stuff for theoretical episodes that you will later never get. So premise pilots showcase the beginning of what the series is going to be, and should give us a clear peek into what the rest of the many vibrant sort of stories in that world are going to contain. Premise pilots are usually going to be for more cinematic kind of shows that contain either major protagonist arcs or a lot changing from episode to episode, or just characters that will be explored throughout the whole series run, or bigger mysteries that need to be solved that have many individual tangible goal-based sections that you need to kind of address and overcome before you can learn the answer to the big question. Something like The Leftovers is all trying to answer one big question that you're not just going to put together right away. So here's some examples of premise shows. I think we all have seen some of these and all have great examples of these, because this is sort of the bread and butter of modern prestige television. The best way to just tell if you have a premise pilot or not is to ask yourself that question of, if this pilot never aired, would the audience know what's going on? Any questions about premise pilots? We do have a little more to go into here on things that we should watch out for and things that work really well in premise pilots. So a couple issues. These pose follow-up questions that development executives might be curious about, or that they don't really like to have these questions. They, if you don't leave these threads strategically hanging well enough, they might say this is a good pilot, but what's the whole season going to be about? Or what's episode 7, 8? What's season 2 or 3 or 4? We can write a show Bible, which we can sometimes give to them that they will also read at the same time, which will explain a lot of these answers. It will start to, brainstorm where these things would essentially go. But it has to sort of be evident in the text itself, and it has to be clear that there is story track, left to go down. So it's not unheard of to sell these, but premise pilots are maybe the most difficult type of pilot to break into the industry with. They're both really hard, don't get me wrong. But it might be the kind of thing where you write a really good premise pilot, then you get hired on a staff of someone else's show. You're probably not going to sell right out of the gate as a new TV writer. You're probably not going to sell a premise pilot and get to run your own show. Status Quo pilots. This is the other major kind. This is the narrative style that we're sort of thrust into the lives and situations of the characters, which is not to say that the pilot cannot have an inciting incident and a main character sort of entering this world. And I think we have on here the IT crowd, which, if I remember correctly, does involve I think her name is Jen, that character who becomes in charge of this little IT department at this company, or something like that. In any case, she is entering this world for the first time. But Status Quo pilots can also just start with everything already in place. You don't need to do any work to arrange, we don't have to say, this is Bart's first day in the Simpson family. You just start with everything already there. And this is kind of an older style in that, everything always ends up where it sort of finished off last week. So things should settle into place in such a way that we understand they'll be there when we pick up the next episode, unless you're doing the kind of cartoon where it just doesn't matter at all. I don't know, something like Courage the Cowardly Dog, one of my favorite shows, has like no real continuity. Every episode totally resets, but like it only works in very limited circumstances. But if the audience tuned in to the show in the middle of season 1 or 2 or even 5 without having watched the pilot episode in a status quo show, they would ultimately have no real problem following the concept, characters, and stories, and a lot of procedurals are like this. You can tune into episode 10 of CSI or episode 500 of CSI and kind of get what's going on, because it's like a template. It's a format for the rest of the show. They're always going to follow that general idea. It's not to say you can't have any development or change within these shows, and I think that even on procedurals, the characters do sort of change over time. But it's not primarily why it's not primarily why people tune into these things. The idea of like a tool set that will exist every week for the writers, or beyond you. If you stopped working on this show, other teams of writers would theoretically be able to come in and be like, generate more episodes of this using these same tools and still without changing anything about it. So you're setting a template for the rest of the show with the pilot. So when you have a status quo pilot, whoever reads the script should understand pretty quickly the tone and atmosphere and scope of this potential series. So the dynamics of the characters and their relationships and the world that they live in and the rules of it and the general conflicts that are going to be ongoing throughout. And they're essentially just, these just need to operate as mini movies with the promise that there are many more sort of mini movies to be found in that same setup. And like I mentioned a few minutes ago, there are these sort of hybrid or mashup soft premise shows where the premise seems to change over time, or the genre even sort of seems to change over time. Like Wilfred sort of goes from status quo dark comedy to almost mystery thriller by the last season. Atlanta, I don't even know what genre it is exactly. Venture Brothers starts out sort of like villain of the week, but develops these much bigger meteor arcs as it goes on. So like these things exist, and it is going to be a spectrum. It's not just like one or the other, but try to land more on one or the other if you're not sure, especially if you're just starting with this, and if you're brand new at this. Try to learn the things with the rules as they lie before you start to try to break them and alter them too much. So let's move on to TV versus features. Feature loglines. They emphasize the protagonist's goal. We're working on TV loglines, which are a little bit different. Remember, we have two loglines. One is series, one is pilot. So the pilot logline is more similar to this feature logline in that it's nice to have that inciting incident. The character's world is shaken up by something that presents them with some kind of choice, some kind of new world to enter, and they, choose to go on that journey. We'd like to get those things implied in our pilot logline, but for the series logline, the emphasis is going to more be on conveying unique situations and story worlds that all promise many different potential episodes and threads and stories as the show goes on. It's focused on creating what is called a story engine, which is a series of elements that just read as generative of many story ideas. And it seems like fertile ground for many different stories that can stem from these same elements. So a pilot logline, remember, more like a feature logline, series logline, focus on character and world. So in the pilot, we want to know inciting incident and protagonist, what do they want, what's in their way. And with both of these, we want to make sure that we're conveying the tone and genre, though, again, you don't have to make the audience laugh with a comedy logline necessarily. If you can, go ahead, but it's like clarity always does come first in these things. So just make sure that it seems like it would be funny. If it's a comedy logline and at the end of reading it, we're like, but why would that be funny? Then something's off. Okay, TV versus features also. Remember, films sort of embrace their core concept and are focused on mining that concept for all of its possibilities within the runtime, whereas TV series are expected to kind of build on the initial concept, and to some extent, the show will be changing throughout the series and the concept will be evolving, which is why we emphasize so much the characters and worlds that they live inside within these pilot or series loglines, and we don't have to worry as much about, we don't have to plot out every season when you're writing just the pilot of a show. So you don't have to, in the same way with a movie, you would have to suggest, oh, this is where it's kind of going by the end. In a TV show series logline, you don't really have to as much. So what are we trying to do? We want to imply a show that is visual and dynamic and about people doing things. Remember that the primary action is going to be tracked through visual action. The goals are going to be tangible. It's not just going to be about somebody sitting around thinking about stuff, or somebody remembering stuff, or people just talking about non-dramatic things in a room together. You want to avoid these intangible goalposts and nebulous finish lines in the pilot logline. You can be a little more nebulous in the series because remember, we don't have to know ultimately where it's kind of going. You want to showcase, though, this unique and fascinating hook and maybe a sense of irony or some new and different POV for this kind of material, or some variation or interesting mashup of familiar elements. Having this element of familiar mixed with something fresh and unique can be a nice way to approach this. But your logline should really make clear that the story has an audience, that it gives us a main character or world that is rich with story potential and feels like it has a strong and, fiery story engine at the core of it. And we're also going to clearly delineate between our premise or status quo shows. And if this is going to be a premise show that has many chapters week by week that we're going to be, just exploring just that one chapter that build a longer narrative, that it feels like that in your pilot, and that it feels like you've given us some questions that you've answered, and you've left other questions and other conflicts open with a sense of where they might go. And if it's a series of episodic situations, then it should feel like a rock-solid foundation for, potentially years of stories. So here's some series loglines. We really like these because they kind of have everything we're looking for. You can see the difference between premise and status quo shows in the specificity of that final goal and like how much you're going to imply where it's going. So remember, premise is going to be like a long movie. That's why it works well for Ozark to say this is a 1-hour crime drama about a fast-talking financial advisor that drags his family from Chicago to the Missouri Ozarks, where he must launder $500 million in 5 years to appease a drug boss. That's a premise show. It's not going to be just every episode resets continuity. We are like building much longer arcs and conflicts within that. We see what the larger goal is, but it's so big that we understand that it will actually probably takes years to launder $500 million. In fact, it tells us 5 years. That kind of implies to me, okay, this is the kind of show that would probably take about 5 seasons, which I think is probably what it's sort of angling to do. Blackish down here is going to be an example of a status quo pilot. Remember, we don't have to be as specific with the character goal or like the specific obstacle. We're looking at the types of situations that this character will be getting in a status quo show. So, an African-American family man struggles to gain a sense of cultural identity while raising his kids in a predominantly white upper-middle-class neighborhood. Suggests conflict and the sorts of stuff that our characters will be doing in this episode. And we still have a protagonist. He's still trying to do something, but it can be a little bit more internal or a little bit broader. It doesn't have to have as tangible goalposts to it. Like, how do you gain a sense of cultural identity? Is there one contest you have to win or a battle of the bands you have to complete before you gain a sense of cultural identity? Not really. That's the kind of thing that you do over years through many small events, through social events, through just meeting people, through getting to know your neighbors. Like, it's a bigger goal that doesn't have just one defining thing that will signal it being completed. And there's other examples on this page, but I just want to make sure everyone is rock solid, crystal clear on the difference between premise and status quo shows and how to approach these things differently. Let's look at the chat. Tom says, I think setting up too many mystery boxes without thinking that foreshadowing through can come back to bite you in later seasons, especially if it's retconned, overlooked, or rushed anticlimactically. Yeah, so you want to be careful with too many questions and too many mysteries, especially if it's going to start to seem like you don't know the answers to these things. You should, even if you don't, and like it's fine if you don't, no one actually really knows all the answers at the end of the pilot or even, in the first few seasons. You gotta kind of imply that you do, and it needs to feel like there's someone at the wheel of the ship and that like we are, we're not just flying blind here. We're not making it up as we go along. So, yeah, it's great to have some mystery boxes and some things that, we understand will take a long time to fully unveil or explain. Some shows are, never explain all kinds of stuff, and that's fine. But just be careful with the promises that you're setting. And if you're setting the expectation of, I'm going to be eventually giving you the answer to this, then your audience is going to start to get really sour if you don't fulfill on those. Okay, any other questions about premise versus status quo shows? And pretty soon we're going to stop with the slideshow, and I want to get into our student loglines for today. All right, no questions. Let's keep going. Pilot loglines look like this usually. It's like a movie. When inciting incident, an adjective protagonist must conflict or else or before the stakes. So you want to remember motivation, stakes, and urgency, super important in the pilot logline. In a series logline, you don't really need that much urgency. What we're doing here should read more like a movie logline. So let's see some student stuff. Let's see some material from students in terms of title, genre, format and time slot, series logline, and pilot logline, whatever you've got ready and developed. If you have several different ideas that you're trying to decide between or you're working on simultaneously, we can help you pick one in the class. Let's see what we've got today. Thank you, Jason. What else do we have? Let's see at least one more. And then we will start getting into these. Anyone else have loglines for us? Thank you, Willow. All right, and thank you, Tom. Great. Okay, let's start with Jason. So hop on mic, Jason. We'll start with Red-Handed. Why don't you read this out for us?
Okay. Title: Red-Handed. Format: 30-minute status quo. Genre: comedy, crime investigation. The series logline is the MRU, which is the Media Response Unit, is an elite FBI task force that investigates America's most attention-grabbing headlines, drawing them into a world of bizarre happenings and outlandish characters. The episode logline of the pilot is a serial butt slapper is on the loose, and it's up to an ambitious agent in the newly created MRU to solve the crime and protect the public from more vicious attacks.
Okay, thank you for that. So I'm going to read that back one more time. So the Media Response Unit is an elite FBI task force that investigates America's most attention-grabbing headlines? Can you explain a little bit?
So, like, they only investigate crimes if the media makes a big deal out of it. So they, like, investigate the ones that are, like, CNN, Fox News people are, like, complaining about.
But by the time the media makes a big deal of a crime, well, I guess that's not always the case. So you're saying, I guess I'm just confused as to what you're going for here with the setup of this institution. Is this sort of a joke, as if saying, is this like supposed to inherently be like a parody of reality in some way, that you're saying the FBI only gets involved once people make enough of a stink about it, and then that's when they swoop in? Is that what the deal is?
Yeah, it's kind of like a parody of like that combined with like Criminal Minds.
Okay, so the idea being that the FBI thinks it makes them like look bad if the media is making a big deal of something and they aren't investigating the case?
Well, it's more just like an absurdist world where like this unit, like the news freaks out about something and then like they get called in to look at it, rather than like what would normally happen.
Isn't that what normally happens though?
Usually at least in like, they usually are the ones that are in there before the media knows about it, and then they control the narrative of how and what information is released to the media. And I was just imagining that this is just a world where it's like kind of the opposite.
I would think it would depend in some cases. Like, I don't know if the FBI is always on top of everything. Like, sometimes they might just, like, they can only have so many eyes in so many places. So I guess just
go ahead. No, this is like kind of like, it's like supposed to be kind of like instead of serial killers, it's like not serial killers, but they're being treated like they are, and I don't know, maybe I'm not clear enough on that.
I get the idea that the premise of the show is that they're treating sort of trivial or silly crimes with a lot of gravity, right?
Yeah.
But in that case, if they're so silly, why are they making a big deal in the media? You see what I mean? Like, I'm just struggling with a little bit of the basics here of the setup of the situation. And like, Media Response Unit sounds like that would be the like press people who work for the FBI that coordinate or speak with the media and try to like control, like you mentioned, control the narrative, or make sure that I'm not exactly sure, but I guess it's just the organization itself is a little odd to me, and I'm not 100% sure, just based on this description, of what the joke is, if that makes sense. It sounds sort of just like this would be fine if it was just FBI agents. So I'm wondering why you have to have this be the setup.
Yeah, well, I was just kind of imagining it as like a direct play off of like the CSIs and the all the letter criminal investigation, like NCIS, that kind of thing. And maybe I think it's more of an issue of me naming it in a more accurate way.
Something that would make sense for me is if it was, for example, you don't have to go this direction or any particular thing that I suggest, but my instinct is if it was called like the Super Serious Crimes Unit, and they only investigate the most serious and heinous of crimes, and they're like, we got a butt slapper on the loose, and like they take that super seriously, I would kind of get the joke, because it's like they're called the Super Serious Crime Unit, but they're in fact addressing crimes that are not super serious and in fact treating them that way. But the fact that it's called Media Response Unit makes me feel that you, just to explain what the premise of the show is and like to build the world of this properly, you might have to pick a different name that is like more ridiculous or more clear what you're in fact making a joke about or something like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And I think also taking that, like the super serious one, I could probably play into like the letters thing and give it like a funny, like...
Yeah, it could be like SUCK or whatever the,
exactly.
Serial Unsolved Crimes Commandos or whatever. Commandos doesn't have a K, but you get it. Like there's just room there for a joke, I feel. Okay, so that was my first thought upon reading this. But basically, we're following FBI investigators that check out America's most attention. So like silly crimes that get a lot of media attention. Gotcha.
Exactly.
The pilot logline is a serial butt slapper is on the loose. And it's up to an ambitious agent. Is that a title? Why is that capitalized?
I don't know.
Oh, okay. It looks like... Is that a rank?
That's just probably me typing it really quickly and not...
Okay. It makes it feels almost like a sort of communist, like a KGB rank or something. Like, he was promoted to ambitious agent for his actions in Moscow. Okay, so it's permitted to an ambitious... a butt slapper is on the loose, comma... and it's up to an ambitious agent in the newly created Media Response Unit to solve the crime and protect the public from more vicious attacks. Can you give us a main character, though? Like, it's up to who? Whose team is this that's in charge of this? Like, who's the person that is going to be going up against this slapper?
Yeah. Agent Berg is the name.
Okay, and Agent Berg is who? Is it their first day on the job? Is it, like, who are they as a human being? Are they a veteran? Were they personally traumatized by a butt slapping years ago?
No, I mean, honestly, this is one of those things where I wrote a short story a while ago that I thought, as a premise, could be fleshed out. So that specific character has not been fleshed out in that way.
Okay, that's fine. So that's what to work on for next week, is find a way to express who the main character is and like why it should be interesting that they're getting involved in this journey. And so you're going to be picking your adjective very carefully. Or your way of describing them, because it's either in like crime procedural type stories, you're best off when the adjective that you're using is going to be a trait that character is struggling with, like an alcoholic detective, for instance. As many times have we seen that, like you get the idea why they do that though, because it's like, oh, that's going to inform his tactics and his problems at home, and a lot of things that are going to like play into how this character solves this crime, right? You also might choose an obsessive-compulsive detective like Monk, right? Because that is going to inform the way that he personally will try to solve this crime. Or we might pick something like a detective that has some personal connection to the case, right? It's like they're chasing a serial killer, and the serial killer, he murdered our own hero's wife. Oh, no. You get it. So, like, that's why we do this. That's why those things are cliches, is because that's what we're looking for, something that informs how is this character going to go about this, or what personally connects them to it in any way. And that like is how we bring any more specificity to a procedural story than a cop who wants to solve crimes gets assigned to a case and they need to stop the bad guy before he keeps doing bad things. It's like, yep, that's just a description of the genre rather than a specific take on a story. So just try to like build this in such a way that we understand what is the irony in why this person... Is this going to be a particularly difficult job for your main character for some reason, or do they have some personal stake in what's going on related to the ridiculous situation that they're in?
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions?
No, I think it's that's why I'm in the class is to get this thing fleshed out.
Great. Okay, yep, keep going with this. I will say, when I worked in the mall in freshman year of college, there was a serial butt stabber going around who would...
Butt stabber?
Yeah, who would like stab people in the bottom with a pocket knife. and I was working in the mall at the time, so I would every day I would be like, today is the day. It's gonna happen. This is Fair Oaks Mall you can look this up, Fair Oaks Mall in Virginia in like 2015 or 16 when I was in college. Yeah.
Every single time I've like played with this idea, I feel like every single person I've talked to has had some sort of like really, and also I want them to, and this is something I didn't talk about, but I wanted most of the investigations to take place in like random suburban cities across the country.
Mm-hmm.
So like they're never in Chicago, they're in like, Greenville, South Dakota or something like that.
So yeah, it's always fun to explore. The country is very huge, but not everything needs to happen in New York or LA, right?
Yeah, exactly. I was just thinking it was like everything we treated like is happening in New York, but it's like happening at like, the mall in my hometown, which is like Northeast Ohio.
Right. I'm with you. And they sort of, the show sort of feels like a David Fincher mystery where like, it's shot and the tone of it feels like Seven or something, but they're just like looking up who stole the frickin' lollipops from the mom and pop store in Idaho or whatever.
Yeah.
I get it.
Yeah, like an Adult Swim version of American Vandal.
Gotcha. I'm with you. I will say, if you're interested in serial butt slappers, I did this history podcast a long time ago about a famous historical spank bandit.
Yeah, no, that's actually part of what this is named after.
Oh, does Spanko come up in this?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
Great. Well, if you want to hear it, I go through the whole saga on this podcast if you ever want to check it out.
I'll have to.
Okay, so I did a couple other history ones on there too, which are pretty fun. All right, so thanks, Tom. If you're all done and have no more questions, we'll move on to Willow.
All right. The North Pole Slayers, 30-minute series. Logline: 6 North Pole elves with behind-the-scenes jobs balance their personal lives with their jobs. The leader of the Slayers attempts to impress his stepson, who idolizes celebrity toymaker elves. A newbie Slayer makes her first solo flight.
All right, so I think you brought this to the intro course. So a couple questions for this one. The first is that I think this logline is not quite done. The series logline, it looks like it ends with a comma here, and it sounds like this might have been. Go ahead.
Typo.
Oh, typo. Okay, so 6. I would try not to say the word jobs twice in a row, especially if it's going to be the end word. So 6 North Pole elves with behind-the-scenes jobs. I'm not quite sure what that would even mean. I know I've heard you explain it before, but if this is my first time reading it, I'm not sure if I would know what that means. I would probably say something like 6 North. Well, how would we put this exactly? 6 North Pole elves. Maybe just 6 elves who work behind the scenes at the North Pole or something like that, I think would make a little more sense to me. Or 6 elves who work support jobs for the North Pole's toy manufacturing plant, whatever it is, just like be a little more explicit in saying what this means. They balance their personal lives with their jobs is kind of the premise of almost every show, like almost everyone's life, I would say. So maybe if you can find something a little bit more specific for this, so they balance their personal lives with, or they struggle to maintain solid family lives in the face of a crazy boss Santa, a crazy Santa, crazy slave driver Santa, rude reindeer, and whatever other obstacles or types of stuff like persist. This might be the kind of thing where you give us like 2 or 3 little examples of like stuff that they run into in the series logline, because just balancing personal life with job can describe like I think almost any story. Make sense, Willow?
Yes. Yeah, it does.
Okay, so let's look at the pilot logline. The leader of the Slayers attempts to impress his stepson, who idolizes celebrity toymaker elves. So with this, I think last time the feedback I think it's mostly going to be the same as when I gave the previous time. So we should suggest in what way he's going to attempt to impress his stepson. If that's what we're going to primarily be watching over the course of the episode, we want to know what we're going to be doing. So is this he takes him on a ride along? Is this he brings him to the back room of the toy plant? What is it that he's doing to impress his stepson that's going to take up this episode and create, like interesting drama and situations? A newbie Slayer makes her first solo flight sounds not connected to the first thing at all, which for a half-hour show seems to me to be a problem. So if there's any way that you can combine these into one thought in some way, or like you can suggest that the first thing is leading to the second thing, or just like make it not seem like just two shows going on, then I think that would be for the best. If there's really nothing connecting these things, and this really just is the kind of show where there's like separate stories that we're following per episode, which would be more along the lines of something. I think we mentioned something like Ice Road Truckers, which is a reality show, right? Or a documentary show. And those shows actually do, from what I understand, more work like this person's story, this person's story. They don't really intertwine because in real life, you know, you can't always make all the stories intertwine, and it's usually more just like separate, unrelated incidents in that kind of show. So if that's really what you're going for, then I would say this is okay. But if it is connected at all to what's going on in the A story, like the fact that the leader of the Slayers brings his son along on a ride-along, which leaves the factory empty, forcing the new new employee to take over and be in charge for the first time and make her first flight on her own. Something like that. Do you see how, if you can connect those things, then it's best if you should, or it's best if you do?
Yeah, you are right. They are connected. The leader is trying to balance multiple things at once, and yeah, they are connected. So, okay, you're right. Yes.
Okay, and yeah, if you can do one sentence, then this will always just seem sort of more cohesive. Any questions, Willow?
No. I think one problem I'm having is nailing down the tone I want to do. I personally find that I am better at writing interpersonal relationships, and so that's what this revolved around, is more interpersonal stuff, with the backdrop of fun things and little side quests and such.
Mm-hmm.
However, I don't know. I'd like to fun it up a bit. Make it a bit more. I would absolutely love like a status quo procedural kind of a thing too, but I'm not sure if that's in my wheelhouse of ability to write.
In the same place that they were last week, then that's usually fine if you're going for a status quo. As long as you don't break everything, you know, then we'll forgive a lot in terms of like understanding that things will be back where they started next time. Sorry, was there a question? What was the question here?
No question. I'm just rambling my insecurities.
Okay, no problem. We all have them. We all have to do it sometimes. So it's all good. And if this is a new direction for you, if this is like new territory, then that's always a good way to practice something new and to grow and expand and increase your skills even more. I will say, in terms of just like fun set pieces and stuff, you're at the North Pole. You have a lot of opportunities. I would watch a bunch of Christmas movies to get ideas of the kinds of stuff that you could do. Really play with the Christmas lore. If you're going to be like subverting or changing it up at all, like if we're portraying Santa as like the asshole boss, that's kind of fun and new. We don't see that much. He's usually kind of, you know, a holly jolly grandfather figure almost. So if Santa is now like a taskmaster mean guy, then that might be a fun place to play around. There's a lot of Christmas lore, and like that gives you a lot of opportunity for jokes and set pieces. And think of what have you always wanted to sort of see in the terms of logistics of Christmas. Like, where do they keep all the presents? Is there like a giant elf warehouse somewhere? And then think of, oh, what are some interesting set pieces I could do with those places? Like, could there be a scene where we go to the elf warehouse and our character needs to get one specific gift from the highest shelf, but you know there's an elf eating monster after him? I don't know, but we can just like take the idea of stuff that you haven't seen before and like questions that you've always wondered, like how do they feed the reindeer, anything, and then like that might suggest to you interesting and fun set pieces that you can use in a comedy story.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Let's see what else we have. Let's go to Deja Voodoo. Tom.
It's as I said, it's still an experimental title, so it's a placeholder.
Mhm.
And what I'm seeing from this logline already is definitely it has a case of kill your darlings. But I'll go ahead and state it anyway. When the visions of a clairvoyant crime journalist guide him to a bloodthirsty interdimensional spirit, he is forced into aiding a secret supernatural agency with its gift in order to help them find the spirit's gateways before it invades the human world and starts hunting down the townspeople.
There's a lot there. All right. Let me
Yeah.
read that back. This is an hour-long mystery thriller. This is Status Quo? How could this be Status Quo? Is this Case of the Week or Monster of the Week?
It still has like these sort of different cases throughout, so that's why I asked the question of Doctor Who, right? Because there's going to be different paranormal activities that are going to be, you know, looked, being handled by case to case basis. Like I have very much the idea, like once a bit the premise is there, that it could become a sort of monster of the week situations where writers can sort of experimentally put in their paranormal writings and retcons, or take it in an interesting direction. Although there will be like a sort of long running story going in the background, basically.
Okay, so something more like the X-Files then is what you're thinking in that case.
Yeah, it's definitely that genre, but I've actually never watched the X-Files, which is really
Oh,
interesting. I feel like
sounds like you should.
only, yeah, for sure. And I know that show's kind of in that direction, but the only show I've kind of watched in that genre is actually Twin Peaks.
Have you seen Fringe?
I've seen like a couple episodes of Fringe. I believe the first few ones. I know it's in the same spirit as well. And last time you told me about the BPRD, which is
Yeah,
also the
yeah.
Hellboy road organization.
Mhm.
Well, I do know those, but yeah.
Okay, well, yeah, I would definitely just watch a few shows like this to get a better sense of how these work and what's sort of been done and what the expectations are, and what can you avoid and what should you lean into. I will say there's too much going on in this pilot log line, and I'm going to have to read it back to fully get it. So, when the visions of a clairvoyant crime journalist guide him to a bloodthirsty interdimensional spirit, he is forced into aiding a secret supernatural agency with his gift in order to help them find the spirit's gateways. What does that mean? What is the spirit's gateways?
So that's how it's sort of going into the world. And there's like probably a lot to explain, which is that his visions guided him towards the spirit initially. And like shamans, like the people with supernatural gifts are sort of like attracted to the otherworldly, like in a sort of mystical sense.
So, I'm sorry, what was the answer? What's a gateway? It's a place where the spirit can come in and out of what the
Yeah,
they're in plane or whatever.
yeah. The gateway itself is still like this sort of like portal or mystery where like the being basically crosses from the other world to this world. So
Isn't
it's
it
not
already in
really
this world? If you, go ahead, sorry.
it's not going to be immediately explained that there's like a different dimensional gateway basically. So it's still a bit more of like a sort of ghost mystery, if you want to put it like that.
But isn't the spirit already in this world if your main character meets it in the pilot?
Yeah, but it travels through gateways basically, so it can go in and out. Beings that can basically perceive out of our dimension and step inside it through different means than we can sort of comprehend.
But then what good does it do this agency to find these gateways if the spirit is already in our world and able to hurt people?
Well, they need to know when it's going to enter our world again. And basically, his visions are going to guide them towards where the spirit will go.
Oh, so you're saying
Because yeah,
you said in your logline that his visions guide him to this spirit, but then you're saying it leaves, and now they're trying to stop it from coming back.
maybe that's a bit unclear as well, but I felt like there's so much in this log line. Like, how do I condense this properly? Like the entire episode.
Well, you might be that the episode that your idea for the story is kind of cluttered, or the way into it is too complicated. Right now, I don't quite even understand the basics of I meet a spirit, an evil spirit, it leaves Earth, and now I meet it with an agency that's like, we have to find all the places that it might come back so that it doesn't come back. Feels like, why did it leave if its intention was to come here and do things in the first place? It just raises more questions than it answers. So like, this would make more sense to me if your main character is having visions of this otherworldly monster trying to break through into our world, and that allows him to meet up with this, like, he, I don't know, starts ranting on the internet or about it or whatever. This causes him to be recruited by this agency who's like, yeah, that thing's real and it's going to break through into our world. This is a little more like something like Stranger Things, I would have to say, but it's going to break through into our world, and we need to find and locate the places the gates that it might come through and close them before it does. Then I understand, okay, that's the stakes and the threat are this monster coming through and starting to massacre people, right? Or, I don't know, do whatever its evil thing is. And I might understand each of our episodes to be a sort of supernatural thing of the week in which we're hunting. It's like Call of Cthulhu or something like that. We're hunting down cults that are, worshiping the spirit, that are, guarding its various locations that it can enter, or maybe they're trying to summon it or something like that. We're taking down cults. We're trying to, destroy these stargates or whatever that allow it to travel here. That would make sense to me. This, what you have now just raises questions and makes me just wonder, like, how, what, why? Do you see what I mean, though? Like, how? Go ahead.
I'll try to explain it a little bit, because how I envision the episode going is basically, it starts out with a dream he has, a vision, and then he sees the monster in it, and it's sort of like he unintentionally stumbles upon the monster. So it's not really, he first brushed it off as a weird dream, but as he goes on his normal routine of investigative journalism of a crime scene, he encounters the monster basically killing someone. And then basically when he's at that scene, I was thinking like the agency would intervene. And then basically they also find out that he's a clairvoyant. So they're like, now that this monster has escaped from us, and we know you're clairvoyant, we know you're attracted to these beings, you're able to find them again. So we're going to take you into custody and make you drafted to work for us.
But then why do the gateways matter?
Well, like I said, it's still a bit wishy-washy, so maybe the gateway part needs to be just left out, I guess. Like
it might be that, yeah. So I think it might help you to have this, to write out the series logline too, and the series logline would tell us the sort of stuff that we're doing from episode to episode. That would be like, imagine for the X-Files, well, you haven't seen the X-Files, but I imagine you know the basic setup, right? There's
yeah,
the basic
I
idea.
get it.
Okay, so it might be something like, skeptical FBI agent Scully teams up with conspiracy theorist Mulder to take on various paranormal cases that the rest of their agency can't solve, taking them all across America, something like that. You see what I mean? So you might just want a series logline that expresses the sort of stuff that we're going to be doing from episode to episode, and then the pilot logline is going to serve to get us into that template or that situation. If you're implying that it has as much urgency as this, which is every episode is going to be based on us trying to defeat this, like, apocalyptic, or, this very bad monster, and the whole season at least, or if not the whole show, is going to revolve around our efforts to stop this monster from coming into our world, it starts feeling much less status quo and much more like a premise show. Excuse me. Because it sounds like this episode would be chapter 1 of a longer, more cinematic story, rather than a series of repeatable situations that could go on for years. So, if this is just going to be the spirit that they deal in the pilot, and this monster is just the monster of the week, then I think you just need a little more clarity in what our main character is trying to do. I don't think you might, if the monster is already in our world, then the goal obviously cannot be let's close these gateways because it's already here. It might be that your main character perceives it in the sort of other world. I think this is kind of how Stranger Things works. Yeah, so all of that I hope just gives you some good ideas to how you're going to build this out. Come up with a series logline too, and make sure that the pilot logline feels like it is leading us into that series.
Yeah, it's going to be sort of difficult to sort of like get the logic right, because I was thinking, it disappears and then reappears, sort of like steps in and steps out.
Right.
In a weird sense. That's what I mean with gateways, like sort of like things we can perceive. And You know, I don't know if you're familiar with like the Monster Inc. doors, where they're able to go into the closet and out of the closet. It's sort of that idea. They can basically break and enter, and that's why they need a clairvoyant to find them, because they have some inherent mysterious connection to the otherworldly beings, and to like the higher plane, if you want to call it that.
Right. So to me, the goal might be we need to stop other monsters from getting through, or it might be we need to stop this monster from escaping, or something like that. But it's just weird that the monster is here, it's accomplishing its goal, then it leaves, and that just raises a lot of questions for me, even if there's a very good reason for that. If you're gonna make the whole stakes of the story, we need to stop this monster from getting here. It just is odd if it were like it was already here, it just chose to depart. So I hope that makes sense, and it might mean that you just have to leave some rules out of the logline.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's, like I said, just kill your darlings a bit. And I was thinking like the reason why it leaves is because the agency has some people with supernatural powers as well. That
Sure.
person might be there when they're both on the crime scene, which makes the monster leave because, you know, it's in danger.
Oh, they scare it away or something?
Yeah, something like that I was thinking of. But I need to
Maybe.
think.
Right. You just need to just develop it a little more, and yeah, build out both of those log lines, and I think by next week you'll have a much stronger foundation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Jason says it sounds like that show Evil. I've not watched Evil. I don't even know what network that's on. Where's that streaming? Is that on AMC? It's episodic, but each episode has a clue or so to the larger overarching evil. Also, there may be 1 or 2 episodes that are central to the overarching villain. Yeah, so a lot of mystery, thriller, and horror shows kind of work like this, or like Exorcist shows. Like there was actually a show of The Exorcist, or any show with like mysteries, solving many mysteries at the heart of it. Everything from Gravity Falls to Twin Peaks to the X-Files. It's like we're doing Monster of the Week, but every time we defeat a Monster of the Week, we get a piece to the larger mystery. Tom says, the mystic cult will leave traces of their meddling with our plane. Plane. Do you mean plane like Plane, like dimension? Yes, okay, that's like that then. Okay, cool. So, I think that we are through all of our log lines for today. Does somebody have a revised one that they want to throw down again and get more feedback on? Or can we get log lines from is anyone watching on our streams? Nacho? Can we tell? Can we get comments from them? Or how does that work? Oh, maybe Nacho can't talk. But regardless, feel free to drop another logline if you have something else you're working on, or if you have a sketchbook that you want to show what you have. Can you hear me, Nacho? Oh, no. Can't hear you, though, in any case. Maybe your mic is goofed. Might have to join then rejoin or something. Or leave then rejoin. Willa says, looked up the Twitter stream, couldn't find anything. Is anyone watching us on Twitter? Are you out there? We can't tell. We have no way of knowing. I didn't know you could stream on Twitter. Is that like... What's that for? Oh, some pictures. Thanks, Tom.
Can you hear me okay?
Oh, I hear you now.
Yeah, so yeah, we have a few people. So far the only comments we got on YouTube, we got a couple of I think Russian spam comments. So,
if there's Russian spammers watching, do you want to give us a logline, Russian spammers? Come on, it's fine.
Yeah. Yeah. So we've got
we can
YouTube,
use Google
Twitch,
Translate
and Twitter.
Great. Well, hi nobody. But if we run out of student loglines, I'm down to take just loglines from anybody. So if in the future, if you're watching this back, you realize this missed opportunity, you could have got your logline feed backed. Looks like Tom, do you want to explain what's happening in these pictures here?
Yeah, sure. I'll explain some. The second picture is actually the first one in the order, but the photos didn't really save that way. So that starts out with, that's one of the images he sees in his vision. It's basically this woman upside down, and then she's like standing in the sky, and she's upside down like in the scenery of a city. And so basically this is the woman who's going to be part of the agency. She's one of the people with powers. but he's not going to see her until much later, or maybe the end of the episode. I'm not too sure about it. I still need to work that out. And so the second picture is the one that started first, because you see the raven. And that's basically one of the future premonitions he has. The raven, like, sort of calls, and that's also the trigger that awakes him inside of his bed.
Mm-hmm.
And then he's like, oh, I've had visions again. Not, he's kind of getting tired of it, but it's also really helpful for his journalist career, because he's seen as some kind of, like, oracle of, like, crime.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third picture, then you see, like, the sort of interrogation where he's sort of being kept stuck in this room with this agent, and behind the glass is basically the woman from the dream. And she's sort of using her telepathic powers on the cuffs he has in order to put him down. And then he's basically angry because he's like, you can't keep me here. I don't want to be here. And in the fourth picture, you see the spirit stealing somebody's life.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. So yeah, these would be great to put in a sketchbook. I don't think I've seen students do original art for their scripts before, so that's awesome. And these can be, in things that might inspire you for the story, or these might be key moments that you want to kind of be building to. So even with just this, I'm sure that you could look at a kind of structure template and start to put down where certain scenes are going to go. And that way you can, build backwards and forwards from those to fill out the entire story. So it's good to have these key moments in mind, even from the very start.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Any questions about anything that we've talked about today, or any topic that you want to hear more about related to TV writing or Scriptcamp? We could look at a couple slides, like what the showrunners are looking for, if no one has questions. I don't see questions. Let's go a little into this slide, or feel free to type them, and I'll get to it in just a second. So, what are showrunners looking for? And this is from a post by somebody who reads for a showrunner. Showrunner's assistant. The thing to keep in mind is that obviously they get hundreds of these, so the showrunner doesn't read all or even most of them. There are filters before it even gets to them. It's going to be done by, either a writer's assistant or by the showrunner's personal assistant themselves. So they have several weeks to read hundreds of scripts during staffing season, so usually while they're doing the many other parts of their job. This is like a secondary or a tertiary duty, which means that you have about 10 to 15 pages to really get their attention. And it's often thought that if in the first 10 pages you aren't doing amazingly good stuff, then the rest won't be that good. And they don't really have time to waste, so they will often start sort of skimming if you don't really grab them early on. So it's your job to give them something that is as polished as it can possibly be. Don't go out with work too early before that your skills are developed enough, or you might waste really good chances in it. You won't get another read from someone most of the time if your first one disappoints them. So you also don't really want to, if for showrunners, you don't want to send a feature or play as your main sample unless they ask for that specifically. If you expect them to read anything over 90 pages, they will be annoyed at you before you even begin. So some other tips to use for your pilots, just to make sure that we're doing things that are the kind of thing that get you staffed. Obviously, this isn't your top priority. Your top priority is just get really good at writing, but you want to get original. Just be original. Write something that is, it can be like something you've seen before, and it doesn't have to be completely brand new in every way, but find some combination of elements that we haven't seen before and try to mash stuff together in a new way. So try a way to stand out, and even in a genre that does not feel particularly open or welcoming to new voices, voice is one of the number one things that they're looking for in TV, because TV is so much about like what you personally bring to the room and what is your lived experience and what is your voice like and what kind of thoughts do you have. So like find ways to bring your own unique take and voice on even genres that you feel are pretty well trodden. So yeah, you can read the rest of these slides for it. These are not written by me. This is again from a post from a showrunner's assistant. But might just give you some things to think about. Make it easy to read also. So that means, use your white space carefully. Don't give us huge, massive, ugly blocks of text. Make it like well written and concise and to the point and clear and, subject, verbs, direct object most of the time, and just be simple and like evocative. And remember, the person
reading your script is exhausted and not paid enough, and probably doing something else at the time. So if they open a script and see these giant blocks of text or massive formatting errors or typos on the first page, all of this is going to be kind of damaging their little invisible confidence meter that goes down very quickly in the first 10 pages. And you need to make sure that is over a certain threshold by the end of that first act. So don't introduce 10 main characters all at once. They'll be confused. Don't jump around into 4 different timelines in the first 4 pages. Just don't make reading the script a chore and an annoying burden for them. And also make sure, of course, you want to have more than one really good sample. And when you realize how difficult it is to write one really good script, you will start to realize how difficult it will be to have a portfolio of 3 to 5 really good scripts. But that is the job. That's what we're signing up for. So welcome to the hardest job ever. It's not the hardest job ever. It's like pretty fun. But it's a pain, and it's a real uphill climb. I will say that. So do February 5th, series logline, pilot logline. We went over some of them today. Fill out your sketchbook, which means, there's not an endpoint. It doesn't need to be any certain number of pages long, but, 3 to 5 pages maybe of just notes and ideas and maybe drawings if you're Tom, or, whatever inspires you or gives you ideas for what the show is going to be. The kinds of things that will happen in it. You want to read at least one recent pilot by a professional that is ideally unproduced and in a similar vein to the thing that you will be yourself working on. We'll have a link for you that shows how to find a bunch of these. We'll look at the schedule here. So week 1 concept and logline, that's this week, January 30th. We're almost done with this class here, but let's just wrap up with a peek at what's ahead. So remember, we're refining this logline and filling out Sketchbook by next week. Next week, we'll talk about structure and broad strokes, in which we'll go through the kinds of stuff that you want to see in a 30-minute and a 60-minute long show, and the general structural beats that are going to help carry you through a 3-act story. We'll have a story beat summary, which is going to be due by the end of that next week, which is going to be like a broad bird's eye view of your entire script, ideally 1 to 3 pages long of just the events in order. Then we'll go into your scene cards, which are going to be February 13th, which are a paragraph that describes every single scene with the page numbers that scene is going to take up in the story. Your best guess, your best projection, your best estimate. Week 4, first act. 5, second act. Week 6, third act. You'll have to write 10 to 20 pages a week, depending on the length of your script, but will be done by March 13th. There's plenty of other stuff going on at Scriptcamp at all times, so that means Writer's Lab every Saturday, 4 o'clock. You can come in with specific questions, obstacles that you're running into in your scripts, or other problems that you want to have addressed, or have me look at a scene, or look at a few pages to make sure that your writing is working, or anything like that. Script swap and table read, Sunday at 4, that's today. I'm not sure what are they doing today in this.
So today's event is just reading like 5 pages out loud, like a table read of your script.
Great. All right. Yep. We do these pretty often, so just check our calendar if you want to see when the next one will be. We have Rewrite Bootcamp, starts February 5th. Pilot Bootcamp, that starts today. And Feature Bootcamp. Free intro for that is on February 11th. That's sort of our main offered course here at Scriptcamp. It's my specialty and the thing that it's always going to be our core class. So come by for the free intro February 11th for that if you want. 8-week course for that starts on the 18th. You gotta also refer a friend if you've got them. If you've got friends. That sounded so passive aggressive. Refer a friend. They get discounted membership. You get a free month of membership. You can do that unlimited numbers of times. So just keep referring friends, and you can keep getting free months. It's great. Also, make sure to come by the Writer's Lab next Saturday if you want help on this script or scene or anything at all. That is going to finish us for today. If you have not already signed up for the course, you can do so at scriptcamp.net/membership.